Serene had worn the crown for 3 years. It took her 4 seconds to remove it. The great hall of Valdrin was filled to the last seat. Every noble house in the kingdom had gathered for the solstice feast, the long tables heavy with roasted venison and winter wine, the iron chandeliers blazing with hundreds of candles that threw restless gold across silk and polished steel. 600 guests, dressed in their finest, laughing and toasting and performing the rituals of celebration that the court demanded every year without fail. It was meant to be a beautiful evening. It was, right up until the moment her husband stood before the entire kingdom and announced that Lady Vera Selden would be elevated to royal consort, effective immediately. The words did not land at first. Seren sat in her throne beside him, spine straight, hands folded in her lap, and watched his mouth form the syllables like she was observing a stranger's life from behind glass. Royal consort. The title was ancient, rarely invoked, and its meaning was unmistakable. He was placing another woman at her side, equal in rank, equal in claim, in front of everyone she had ever known. The hall went silent. 600 faces swiveled toward her, measuring, waiting, some pitying, some delighted, most simply stunned into stillness. She could feel the pressure of their attention against her skin like heat from a furnace. Seren looked at Thalric, her mate, her husband, the man whose bond mark she carried on the left side of her throat, the crescent-shaped scar he had pressed into her skin 3 years ago with his teeth and his promise. You are mine, and I am yours. Nothing changes that. Not war, not time, not death. He was not looking at her. He was looking at Vyra, who stood at the base of the dais in a gown of deep crimson, her dark hair swept high to expose the pale column of her neck. Vyra's face was composed, expectant, carrying the faint, satisfied curve of someone who had already been told the outcome. Something fractured in Seren's chest. Not the bond, not yet, but something load-bearing, the part of her that had spent years believing she was enough. She stood. The motion was unhurried, controlled, but it silenced the last whispers in the hall. Thalric turned toward her, and for one brief, guttering instant something surfaced in his expression. Confusion. Recognition. The look of a man breaking through ice to gasp a single breath before the current drags him back under. Then it vanished. His face smoothed into the same flat, glassy calm that had settled over him in recent weeks, and he regarded her with eyes that were the right color, but emptied of everything she knew. Seren reached up and lifted the crown from her head. It was heavier than anyone who had never worn it could imagine, a circlet of white gold set with pale moonstones that had belonged to every Luna of Valdrin for 11 generations. It had left a faint, permanent ridge in her hair from years of daily wear. She set it on the arm of the throne. The small click of metal against carved wood cut through the silence like a blade. Seren. His voice reached her from somewhere far away, muffled, stripped of urgency. She did not answer. She descended the 3 steps from the dais, her gown trailing across the stone, and walked the full length of the center aisle. 600 people sat on either side, close enough to touch, and not one of them spoke. Not one of them moved. Her footsteps echoed in a hall built to hold the roar of armies, and right now it held only the sound of her leaving. She would not cry here. She would not fracture here. They would get nothing from her but the sight of her back. The great doors stood 20 feet high, carved oak braced with iron bands gone black with age. 2 guards flanked them, their faces deliberately blank. They pulled the doors open without waiting for the command. Cold air flooded in, sharp with pine resin and the mineral bite of coming snow. Beyond the courtyard, the northern mountains rose against the dark sky like a wall between this life and whatever came after. Seren stepped through. Behind her, she heard Jorith's voice crack across the silence. Seren, wait. She did not wait. The doors groaned shut, and the hall sealed behind her like a wound closing over something still lodged inside. She made it as far as the eastern courtyard before her body failed her composure. Her knees buckled at the stone fountain, her fingers locking around the frozen rim, and a sound tore out of her that she did not recognize. Not a cry. Something lower, more animal. Her wolf, thrashing against her ribs like a creature in a cage. The bond mark on her throat flared. Not the familiar warmth she had carried since their mating, the steady pulse that reminded her every waking moment that she was claimed and chosen and loved. This was a thread being wrenched from living tissue, slow and deliberate. Their bond was unraveling. She pressed her palm against the mark, gasping, and for one stuttering heartbeat she felt him. Thalric. Distant and muffled, like a voice calling from the bottom of a well. Confusion bled through the bond, then panic, raw and sharp, as if some buried part of him had just realized she was gone. Then nothing. The thread went slack. The panic cut off mid-pulse, smothered like a candle flame pinched between wet fingers. Seren stared at the castle walls, her breath clouding in the frozen air, and understood. That flicker of confusion in his eyes on the dais. The panic that surged and died through the bond just now. The weeks of strange, flat calm. This was not betrayal. This was not choice. His eyes when he spoke Vera's name had held no desire, no affection, no defiance. What she had seen in them, what she could not unsee now, was obedience, and whatever was controlling him had just noticed her paying attention. 3 days. That was how long Seren lasted before the grief became geography. She left Valdrin on foot in the hours before dawn, carrying a healer's satchel, a change of clothes, and the stubborn, suffocating awareness that her bond mark had not pulsed once since the fountain. Not a flicker. Not a tremor. 3 years of constant warmth replaced by skin that felt like scar tissue, numb and foreign against her fingertips. She told herself she was leaving because staying was impossible. A Luna who had publicly removed her crown could not simply appear at breakfast. The court would devour her. Vera would watch with that serene, patient smile. And Thalric, whatever was left of him beneath that glass-eyed calm, would look through her like she was furniture. But the truth she could not outrun was simpler and uglier. She was terrified. Not of Vera, not of the court. Not of the humiliation that would follow her name for years. She was terrified of standing in front of the man she loved and seeing nothing behind his eyes, of reaching for the bond and finding only dead air. She had suspected enchantment. She still suspected it. But suspicion was not certainty, and the part of her that had been carved open in that great hall whispered something far worse. What if it was not a spell? What if he simply wanted someone else, and the obedience she thought she recognized was just a man who had made up his mind? That thought was poison. She carried it with her over the northern ridge and into the lowland forests, where the snow thinned to frost and the villages grew sparse. She found work at an herb house in Garen's Hollow, a settlement small enough that no one recognized the former queen in the woman with shadows under her eyes and dirt beneath her fingernails. The herbalist, an elderly widow named Dalla, asked no questions and paid in meals. Seren ground poultices, sorted dried roots, and tried to fill the silence in her chest with the rhythms of manual work. It did not help. The absence of the bond was a physical thing, a cavity behind her ribs that ached when she breathed and throbbed when she lay still. She dreamed of Thalric every night, dreams soaked in longing and dread, and woke each morning with her hand pressed to the mark on her throat, searching for warmth that was no longer there. On the 4th day, Jorith found her. She was hanging dried chamomile in the back room when the door opened, and the beta of Valdrin stepped inside, still wearing his riding cloak, his face drawn with exhaustion and something close to fear. She had never seen Jorith afraid. In all her time at the castle, she had watched him face border skirmishes, trade disputes, and a full-pack challenge without so much as raising his voice. The man standing in the doorway looked like he had not slept since she left. "Before you say anything," Seren started, her voice harder than she intended, "I am not coming back." "I need you to listen," Jorith said. "He made his decision in front of 600 people, Jorith. He chose her. I watched him do it. That is exactly what I need to talk to you about." He closed the door behind him and glanced around the small room, as if checking for ears. "Thalric is wrong." The word landed strangely. Not angry, not cruel, not unfaithful. Wrong. "He does not eat unless Vera tells him to," Jorith continued, his voice pitched low. "He does not speak in council unless she prompts him. He signed 3 territorial concessions last week without reading them." I watched his hand move across the page, and his eyes were not following the words. Seren's stomach turned. "Jorith. I tried to see him alone. Every time, she is there. Every single time. Standing just behind him or beside him, or close enough that I can smell whatever perfume she wears. Something floral and cloying that clings to the walls after she leaves." He paused, his jaw working. "He called me by the wrong name yesterday. He looked at me, and for a moment, I swear he did not know who I was." The chamomile slipped from Seren's fingers and scattered across the floor. She did not pick it up. "That is not the man I served for 9 years, Jorith said. "And it is not the man who mated you." Seren pressed her back against the wall and folded her arms tight across her chest, as if she could hold herself together by force. "What are you telling me?" "I am telling you that the night you left, after the doors closed, he collapsed, fell out of his chair like someone had cut his strings. Vera was at his side before anyone else could reach him. She touched his face, whispered something, and he stood back up." Jorith's expression hardened. "And then he asked what the commotion was about. As if you had never existed. As if the last 3 years had not happened." The air left the room. Seren could not speak. "He screamed your name that night," Jorith said quietly. "In his sleep. I heard it from the corridor. One scream, your name, and then silence. And when I went in, Vera was already there, her hand on his forehead, and he was still. The next morning he did not mention you, has not mentioned you since." Seren's vision blurred. She blinked hard, forcing the tears back, refusing to break down in front of the one person who still believed in what she and Thalric had been. "Someone is feeding on him, Seren. I do not know how. I do not know what she is. But that thing in our castle wearing the title you built is not his consort. She is his keeper." The bond mark on Seren's throat throbbed once, dull and distant, like a heartbeat heard through deep water. Then nothing. "And there is one more thing," Jorith said, his voice dropping further. "The bond mark on his neck, the one you gave him, it is disappearing. Fading a little more each day like something is erasing it. Brindis says if it vanishes completely, the bond dies." He held her gaze. "And she is not certain either of you will survive that." Brindis arrived at Garen's Hollow 2 days after Jorith, riding a borrowed horse and carrying a leather case that smelled of crushed valerian and old paper. The castle's head healer was a compact woman with close-cropped silver hair and hands that moved with the focused precision of someone who had spent 40 years cutting and stitching and coaxing broken bodies back together. She did not waste time on greetings. "Sit down," she told Seren, setting the case on Dala's work table. "And take your hand off your bond mark. You have been pressing on it constantly, and irritating the skin will not make it work again." Seren dropped her hand, caught, and sat. "I examined the king 9 days ago," Brindis said, unlatching the case. "Or I tried to. Lady Vera does not appreciate healers in her presence. She told me his health was her concern now and suggested I focus on the servants." "Charming woman." "How did you examine him then?" Seren asked. "I lied." Brindis pulled out a folded parchment covered in her tight, angular handwriting. Told the kitchen staff I needed to inspect the king's wine for contamination. They let me into the cellars where I had an unobstructed view of the dining hall through the service corridor. I watched him eat. Or rather, I watched him not eat, until Vera leaned in and murmured something, and then he picked up his fork and chewed like a man following instructions. She spread the parchment on the table. His pupils do not react to changes in light. His responses in conversation are delayed by exactly the same interval every time, roughly 2 seconds, as if something is processing his words before he is allowed to speak them. And his scent has changed. Changed how? Seren asked, leaning forward. Every alpha carries a dominant scent. Thalric's has always been cedar and iron, unmistakable, stable. Last week it smelled like standing water, like something stagnant. Brindis looked up from the parchment. There is something growing over his mind, Seren. Something that is not him. And it is being fed by whoever is close enough to maintain contact. Vera, Seren said, the name bitter on her tongue. I believe so, but this is not a simple enchantment. Simple enchantments break when the caster sleeps. They require constant renewal, and they leave obvious traces that any competent healer would detect within days. Brindis folded her hands on the table. This is something older, something symbiotic. It lives in the bond channel between alpha and mate, and it feeds on the connection itself. Seren stared at her. It is feeding on our bond? Like a vine strangling a tree. Your bond is the root system, the deepest channel of trust and intimacy between two wolves. This thing has threaded itself through that channel and is using it as a food source. Every ounce of connection, every memory, every emotional link between you and Thalric, it is consuming them. That is why his mark is fading. That is why the bond feels dead. The channel is still there, but something else is drinking from it. The room seemed to tilt. Seren gripped the edge of the table. There are old records, Brindis continued, accounts from the southern packs, centuries old, describing parasitic bonding. A practitioner latches onto an existing mated bond because forming one from nothing is nearly impossible. It is far easier to hijack a channel that already exists, that has already been opened by trust and love and years of shared vulnerability. So she chose Thalric because of me, Seren whispered. Because we had a strong bond. Because there was something worth stealing. Brindis nodded slowly. The stronger the bond, the richer the feeding ground. And yours was exceptionally strong. Seren wanted to be sick. 3 years of love, of building something real and intimate and irreplaceable, and it had made them a target. The very thing she treasured most had become the weapon used against them. What happens when it finishes feeding? Seren asked, though she already knew the answer. She could feel it in the hollow space behind her ribs, in the cold absence where the bond used to hum. Brindis met her gaze, and for the first time since arriving, the healer's composure cracked. The bond dies, she said, and the shock of a severed mating bond, particularly one this deep, will kill him. His wolf will not survive the severance. His body will follow within days. And me? Seren asked. Brindis did not answer immediately. The silence told Seren everything. You are already deteriorating, the healer said carefully. The fatigue, the migraines, the nausea you think I have not noticed. Your body knows the bond is dying, and it is responding accordingly. If the bond breaks fully while you are separated from him, the severance shock will hit you too. How long? Seren asked. Weeks. Perhaps less. The fading is accelerating. Seren pressed both hands flat against the table, steadying herself against a wave of dizziness that rolled through her like nausea. Weeks. She had weeks to save a man who did not even remember her name, from a creature wearing the face of a woman who had already taken everything. There is one more thing, Brindis said, and something in her tone made Serene's blood go cold. The parasite cannot be removed by force. It has rooted too deeply. The only way to starve it is to restore the original bond, to flood the channel with something genuine and overwhelming enough to burn the invader out. "You are telling me I have to make him love me again," Serene said. "A man who has been wiped clean of every memory of what we were." "I am telling you that you need to reach whatever is left of him," Brindis replied, "before there is nothing left to reach." Serene stared at the parchment on the table, at the healer's careful notes documenting the systematic destruction of her mate. She thought of Thalric's eyes in the great hall, glassy and vacant. She thought of his scream in the night, her name ripped from his throat before being smothered into silence. She thought of the bond mark on her neck, cooling by the hour, a countdown etched into her own skin. She thought about walking away, about surviving, about letting go, about building a life in Garen's Hollow where no one knew her name and no one could hurt her again. And then she thought about Thalric waking in the night with no one there to hear him scream. "I need to get back into that castle," Serene said. Brindis exhaled slowly, as if she had been holding her breath. "I was hoping you would say that." She reached into her case and pulled out a small glass vial filled with dark amber liquid. "Because I have already started working on how." Serene returned to Valdrin dressed as a dead woman. Brindis had arranged everything. A servant named Marith had died of fever 2 weeks prior, a quiet woman from the southern provinces with no family and no friends close enough to recognize an imposter. Her documents were real. Her assignment to the castle's lower kitchens was already on record. All Serene had to do was cut her hair, darken it with walnut stain, keep her head down, and answer to a name that was not hers. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, and not because of the deception. Walking back through the castle gates felt like pressing her hand against a hot stove. Every corridor held a memory. The alcove near the western stairs where Thalric had kissed her for the first time, urgent and slightly clumsy because a delegation from the eastern Pax had been 20 steps behind them. The library where she used to read while he worked, their ankles touching beneath the table, a contact so small and constant that she only noticed it when it was gone. The garden where he had asked her to be his Luna, not with a grand speech or a formal ceremony, but standing in the rain with mud on his boots, saying, "I cannot do this without you. I do not want to do this without you." She shoved every memory down and kept walking. The kitchens were hot and loud and mercifully anonymous. No one looked twice at the new girl scrubbing pots and hauling firewood. Serene worked through the first day in silence, her hands raw from lye soap, her ears straining for any mention of the king. The kitchen staff gossiped freely, and what she heard made her stomach clench. The king barely left his chambers anymore. Lady Vera handled most audiences on his behalf. He had cancelled the winter patrol inspections, something he had never missed in 9 years of rule. 2 advisors had resigned. 3 more were considering it. "He just sits there," one of the cooks muttered while chopping turnips, "stares at the wall, nods when she tells him to nod, signs what she puts in front of him. It is like someone carved him out and left the shell." Serene's knife slipped. She cut her thumb and watched the blood well up without feeling it. That evening, she was assigned to carry wood to the upper corridors. The task took her past the great hall, past the council chambers, past the private wing where the king's rooms waited behind heavy oak doors she used to open without knocking. She smelled him before she saw him. Cedar and iron, buried beneath something rancid and sweet, like flowers rotting in standing water. The scent hit her mid-stride and nearly buckled her knees. Her wolf surged forward so violently she had to brace herself against the wall, the firewood clattering in her arms. Then he turned the corner. Thalric walked toward her flanked by 2 guards. Vera half a step behind him with her hand resting on his arm like a leash, disguised as affection. He was thinner than she remembered. The jacket hung loose across shoulders that used to strain the seams. His cheekbones stood out sharply, and the skin beneath his eyes was bruised the color of old plums, but his eyes were the worst part. She had prepared herself for emptiness. She had expected the glassy, vacant stare Jorith had described. What she was not prepared for was the exhaustion. He looked like a man who had been screaming underwater for weeks, who had used up every ounce of fight, and was now simply enduring, breath by breath. Seren pressed herself flat against the wall as they passed, head down, arms full of wood, invisible. A servant. Nobody. 3 feet of distance, close enough to touch. The bond stirred deep within her, faint and desperate, like a moth batting against glass. Thalric slowed, his head turned slightly, nostrils flaring. He frowned, the first expression she had seen on his face that was not flat compliance, and his step faltered. Thalric? Vera's voice was silk wrapped around something sharp. Her fingers tightened on his arm. He blinked. The frown dissolved. He kept walking, and the corridor swallowed them both. Seren stood motionless against the wall, firewood digging into her forearms, her heart slamming against her ribs so hard she was certain the guards had heard it. He had smelled her. Something in him, buried and suffocating beneath whatever Vira had woven through his mind, had recognized her for half a second. Half a second was enough. That night, lying on the narrow cot in the servants' quarters, Seren pressed her hand to her bond mark and waited. The skin was cool, almost numb, the crescent scar so faded she could barely trace its edges in the dark. But she held her palm against it and focused, reaching through the dead channel the way she used to reach for him across a crowded room, not with words, but with the feeling itself, the certainty, the belonging. Nothing answered for a long time. Then, just before she surrendered to exhaustion, the faintest tremor moved beneath her fingers. Not warmth, not quite. More like the memory of warmth, the echo of something that used to burn. And through the bond, muffled and fractured, she felt him dreaming. He was searching, moving through darkness, hands outstretched, calling for someone whose name had been taken from his mouth. He did not know who he was looking for. He only knew that the absence was killing him. Seren curled onto her side, tears sliding into the rough pillow, and whispered into the dark, "I am here. I am right here." The bond trembled once more, then fell silent. She began with scent. It was the oldest language between bonded wolves, deeper than speech, harder to manipulate, rooted in the body rather than the mind. If Vera's hold operated through Thalric's conscious thoughts, through his memories and decisions and the parts of his mind that could be rewritten, then Seren would go beneath all of that. She would reach the animal. Brindis supplied her with the tools. Juniper oil, because their chambers had always smelled of it. A diffuser Seren had kept on the windowsill since their first winter together. Cedar shavings, because that was his own scent reflected back at him. A reminder of what he was supposed to smell like before the rot crept in. And lavender from the castle gardens, because Seren had always dried it in bundles and hung it from the wardrobe, and he used to press his face against her hair and tell her she had made even the air taste like home. She was careful. A sachet tucked behind a tapestry in the corridor he walked each morning. Cedar shavings scattered beneath the council table where his feet rested during meetings. A sprig of juniper placed on the windowsill of his study, positioned where the afternoon sun would warm it and release the oil into the air. Small things, invisible things, things that would slip beneath Vera's attention because they carried no magic, no power, no threat. Just scent, just memory, pressed into the air like fingerprints. The first change came on the 3rd day. Seren was mopping the corridor outside the council chambers when the doors opened and Thalric emerged. He paused in the doorway, his head tilting slightly, and inhaled. The rigid line of his shoulders softened by a fraction. His hand, which had been clenched at his side, opened. Vera appeared behind him. "Is something wrong?" "No," he said. But he stood there for a moment longer, breathing, and something in his face looked almost like confusion, almost like grief, as if his body was remembering something his mind had been forbidden to know. On the 5th day, Seren started humming. It was a song from their wedding. Not the formal anthem the musicians had played for the court, but the one Thalric had sung to her afterward, alone in their chambers, flushed from the celebration and grinning in a way she had never seen before or since. His singing voice was terrible. He knew it. She had laughed so hard she cried, and he had pulled her close and kept singing anyway, off-key and completely shameless, until she kissed him to make him stop. She hummed it while she worked, quietly, almost inaudibly, just a melody drifting through the stone corridors like a ghost. The first time Thalric heard it, he stopped walking. The second time, his hand went to his chest, pressing against the place where his bond mark was disappearing. The third time, he turned and looked directly at her. Seren kept her head down, kept mopping, kept humming. Her hands were shaking so badly the mop handle rattled against the bucket. He stared at her for 6 seconds. She counted every one. Then Vera's voice came from somewhere behind him, and he turned away. But that night, the bond mark warmed. Faintly, barely, like the last ember in a fire everyone else had given up on. Seren pressed her palm against it and felt tears burn behind her eyes. She pushed further. On the 7th day, she managed to position herself in the dining hall during the evening meal, carrying platters from the kitchen to the serving tables. Thalric sat at the head of the long table, Vera beside him, her hand resting on his forearm. He was not eating. His plate sat untouched, his gaze fixed on the middle distance. Seren moved along the table, setting down a platter of roasted game, and as she reached past him, her fingers brushed his hand. The contact lasted less than a heartbeat. Skin against skin. The briefest, most accidental touch. Thalric's entire body went rigid. His pupils dilated wide, the gray of his irises swallowed by black, and his head snapped toward her. He looked at her, truly looked, and for 3 suspended seconds the glass wall behind his eyes cracked. His lips parted. No sound came out, but she could read the shape his mouth made. Her name, Seren. The air between them pulled taut as a wire, the bond surging desperately through her, reaching for him, reaching. Vera's hand closed over his shoulder. "Darling, you look unwell. Perhaps you should rest." The light in his eyes guttered and died. His face smoothed. He looked away from Seren as if she had never existed, stood when Vera guided him to stand, and left the hall without a backward glance. Seren stood frozen beside the empty chair, her hand still extended, the ghost of his skin burning against her fingertips. That night she lay awake on her cot, staring at the ceiling, trying to breathe around the ache in her chest. The bond mark pulsed weakly, the warmth fading in and out like a signal from a sinking ship. Then she heard the footstep. A single, careful sound outside her door. She held her breath. Something scraped softly against the wood, and then the footstep retreated, slow and heavy and uncertain. Seren waited until the silence settled before she moved. She opened the door and looked down. A sprig of juniper lay on the threshold. Freshly cut, still damp with sap, placed there with the kind of deliberate care that suggested the person who left it did not fully understand why they had done it. Seren picked it up, pressed it to her lips, and wept. He did not know who she was. The enchantment had taken her name, her face, their history. But somewhere beneath all of it, buried so deep that even Vera could not reach it, some part of Thalric was still searching for her. Still leaving traces. Still reaching through the dark for a hand he could not remember holding. She clutched the juniper to her chest and made a decision. Tomorrow, she would stop hiding. Tomorrow, she would find a way to touch him again, to hold the contact long enough for the bond to catch, long enough for the ember to flare into something Vera could not smother. But as she closed the door, She did not see the figure standing motionless at the far end of the corridor, watching her with dark, unblinking eyes. Vera smiled. The trap was elegant. Seren had to give her that. The next morning, Seren was reassigned. A senior maid informed her over breakfast that Merith, her borrowed identity, had been selected to join the cleaning detail for the king's private wing. Effective immediately, direct orders from the lady consort herself. Seren's blood went cold. She searched the maid's face for any sign of suspicion and found none. The woman was bored, impatient, eager to finish her porridge. It could mean nothing. Servants were rotated regularly. Assignments shifted. There was no reason to assume Vera had noticed the new kitchen girl with the walnut-stained hair. Except Seren did not believe in coincidence. Not anymore. She went anyway. Refusing would draw more attention than complying. She took the cleaning supplies, climbed the narrow service staircase to the private wing, and pushed open the door to the king's study. The room smelled like standing water. It was stronger here, concentrated, the sweet, rotting floral scent that clung to Vira wherever she went. Seren pressed her sleeve over her nose and forced herself to work, dusting shelves, sweeping the hearth, polishing the desk where Thalric had once spent hours drafting trade agreements and border strategies with the intense, meticulous focus that she used to tease him about. She was wiping down the windowsill when she found it. A small glass dish, tucked behind the curtain, filled with a thick, dark liquid that caught the light like oil. It pulsed. Not visibly, but she could feel it against her skin, a slow, rhythmic throb that matched the cadence of a heartbeat. Seren leaned closer and gagged. The liquid smelled of Thalric. Not the clean cedar and iron she knew, but the corrupted version, stagnant and sweet, as if his essence had been extracted and left to ferment. She reached for the dish, and a voice behind her said, "I would not touch that if I were you." Seren spun. Vera stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame with the casual posture of someone who had been watching for quite some time. Her dark hair fell in loose waves over one shoulder, and her expression was pleasant, composed, entirely unthreatening. "You have been very clever," Vera continued, stepping into the room. "The juniper was a nice touch. Scent memory is remarkably persistent. Even my best work has difficulty overriding the olfactory pathways completely." Seren did not move. Her hand was still extended toward the dish, her body frozen between flight and something more dangerous. "I knew someone was interfering the moment his sleep patterns changed," Vera said, circling the desk. He started dreaming again. Not the empty black nothing I had given him, but actual dreams. He was searching for something. I could taste the longing in the bond channel, and it was not directed at me. She paused, studying Seren with detached curiosity. "Imagine my surprise when I traced it back to a kitchen girl who arrived 3 weeks ago under a dead woman's name." "What are you?" Seren asked. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. The terror was there, thrumming beneath her ribs, but it was buried under something harder, something that had been building since the night she watched her husband speak another woman's name with empty eyes. Vera tilted her head. "I am exactly what your healer suspects. A parasite, if you want the ugly word. Though I prefer to think of myself as an improvement. Your king was wasting himself, do you know that? All that power, all that authority, crippled by sentiment and moral hesitation. He agonized over every decision. He lay awake at night worrying about grain tariffs and border refugees when he should have been consolidating territory. He lay awake at night because he cared about his people," Seren said through her teeth. "And now he does not lie awake at all," Vera replied, her smile widening. "You are welcome." Seren's wolf snarled behind her ribs, pressing against her skin, begging to surface. She held it back. Barely. "You cannot have him," Vera said, her tone shifting to something harder. "The bond is nearly consumed. Another week, perhaps 2, and the channel will be mine completely." "His wolf has already submitted," The animal recognizes a stronger claim. You are lying, Seren breathed. Am I? Vera's eyes glittered. Let me show you. She moved to the door and spoke a single word into the corridor. Footsteps followed, heavy and measured, and Thalric entered the study. Seren's heart cracked open. He was worse than the last time she had seen him. His skin had taken on a grayish cast, and the bones of his wrists stood out where his sleeves had ridden up. His eyes, those familiar gray eyes that used to track her across every room she entered, swept over her without pause, without recognition, without anything at all. Darling, Vera said, reaching up to touch his jaw. Her fingers were gentle, proprietary. This woman has been trespassing in your private chambers. She has been planting foreign objects throughout the castle and attempting to interfere with your staff. What would you like done with her? Thalric looked at Seren. She held his gaze and poured everything she had into the bond. Every memory, every moment. Every morning she had woken in his arms and felt his heartbeat against her spine. She pushed it through the dying channel like blood through a collapsing vein. Something flickered behind his eyes. A tremor. A fracture line in the glass. Thalric, Seren whispered. It is me. Please. For one agonizing second she thought it was working. His brow creased, his lips parted. His hand twitched at his side, the fingers curling as if reaching for something. Then Vera leaned in and pressed her mouth to his temple. A soft, deliberate kiss that Seren felt like a knife in her sternum. The tremor in his eyes died. The fracture sealed. Whatever had been surfacing sank back beneath the glass, and the man who looked at her was a stranger wearing her husband's face. Remove her from the castle, Thalric said. His voice was flat, toneless, a voice reading from a page someone else had written. She is not welcome here. The words hit her like a physical blow. She staggered, catching herself on the edge of the desk. Thalric, please, she managed. You know me. You left the juniper at my door. You know me. He did not respond. He turned away, Vera's hand on his arm, and walked out of the study without looking back. Guards materialized in the doorway. Hands closed around Seren's arms, firm and impersonal, and she was pulled from the room, down the corridor, through the servants' passages, past the kitchens where she had scrubbed pots and pretended to be someone else, and out through the eastern gate. They released her in the courtyard where she had collapsed the night she left. The fountain was dry now, drained for the winter, and the stone rim where she had gripped and howled was crusted with frost. Seren stood in the cold and felt the bond mark on her throat go dark. Not fading, not cooling. Dark. The last thread of warmth that had survived the juniper, the humming, the touch of his hand, the sprig left at her door, all of it extinguished in one breath. She pressed her fingers to her neck and felt smooth, unmarked skin where the crescent used to be. The mark was gone. Behind her, from somewhere high in the castle, she heard Vera laugh. The sound drifted through the frozen air like something sharp falling from a great height. And inside her chest, in the place where the bond had lived for 3 years, there was nothing. Just a hollow, growing wider by the second, filling with cold. The days after the banishment blurred together like rain on glass. Seren did not return to Garen's Hollow. She made it as far as the tree line beyond the castle walls before her legs stopped working. She sat down in the frozen pine needles with her back against a trunk and stayed there, watching the castle towers rise above the canopy until the cold seeped through her cloak and into her bones. The bond was gone. She kept touching her throat, pressing her fingers against the smooth skin where the crescent used to be, searching for something that was no longer there. It was like reaching for a limb that had been amputated. The nerves still fired. The brain still expected contact. But the hand closed on nothing. She was deteriorating. She could feel it in the way the world kept tilting when she stood, in the tremor that had settled permanently into her hands, in the nausea that arrived each morning and never fully left. Her wolf had gone quiet, curled somewhere deep inside her chest, barely breathing, conserving whatever was left. 4 days after the banishment, Jorth found her. He looked worse than she had ever seen him. His riding clothes were wrinkled, his jaw unshaven, and there was a wildness in his eyes that did not belong on a man who had built his entire identity on composure. He collapsed, Jorth said without preamble. 2 days ago, during a council session, fell forward onto the table and did not get up. Seren's chest seized. Is he alive? Barely. Jorth crouched beside her, his voice low and urgent. Vera is unraveling. Whatever she was feeding on, whatever she took from your bond, it is running out. She is trying to maintain her hold, but without the bond channel, she has no source. She is burning through what is left of him to keep herself anchored. She is killing him, Seren whispered. She was always killing him. The bond just kept him alive long enough for it to be slow. Jorth reached into his coat and pulled out a folded note. Brindis sent this. Read it. Seren's hands shook so badly it took 3 attempts to unfold the parchment. Brindis's tight handwriting covered both sides. The bond channel is collapsed but not destroyed. Think of it as a river that has been dammed and drained. The riverbed remains. At the deepest point of any mating bond, beneath the memories and the emotions and the conscious connection, there is a root. The original moment of bonding. The first time 2 wolves recognized each other, not as mates in the ceremonial sense, but as the other half of something that had always been incomplete. That root is woven into the soul, not the mind. Vera cannot touch it because she did not create it and does not understand it. She has been feeding on the water in the river. She does not know the riverbed exists. If you can reach that root, if you can find the place where the bond began and reignite it, the channel will flood, and the flood will burn her out. But you must understand the risk. Entering a collapsed bond channel is not like dreaming or imagining. It is like stepping into a flood with no guarantee you will surface. You will feel everything the bond has absorbed over 3 years, every joy, every grief, every moment of intimacy, compressed into a single experience. If you cannot find the root, if you lose yourself in the flood, you will not surface. Neither of you will. Seren read it twice. Then she folded the note carefully, tucked it inside her coat, and stood. Take me to him. The castle was different now. The corridors that had been orderly and well lit were dim, half the torches guttered out. Servants moved in tight clusters, speaking in whispers. Guards stood at their posts with the rigid alertness of men waiting for something terrible. The stench of decay permeated everything, thick and sweet and rotten, so strong that Seren had to breathe through her mouth. Vera was nowhere to be seen. Jorth led Seren through the private wing without resistance, past doors that should have been locked, and guards who looked away as they passed, and she understood that the castle staff had made a choice. Whatever loyalty Vera had commanded through fear was collapsing along with her power. The king's chambers were barely recognizable. The curtains were drawn, the fire had burned down to gray ash, and the air was thick with the smell of corruption. The glass dishes, a dozen of them, were scattered across every surface, each filled with the same dark, pulsing liquid Seren had found in the study. They lined the windowsills, the mantel, the bedside table, surrounding him like the points of some terrible constellation. Thalric lay on the bed, motionless. His breathing was shallow, each inhale followed by a pause long enough to make Seren's heart stop before the next one came. His skin had gone the color of candle wax, and his hands, those broad, capable hands that used to cup her face like she was the most fragile thing he had ever held, lay open and slack at his sides. She sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress barely dipped under her weight. She had lost more than she realized in the past weeks. Thalric, she said, I know you cannot hear me, But I need you to know that I am here, and I am not leaving. And if there is any part of you still in there, I need you to hold on." His breathing did not change. The room was silent except for the slow, rhythmic pulse of the glass dishes. Brindis appeared in the doorway, her face grim. "Vera is in the East Tower. Jorith's men are watching her. She is too weak to intervene, but she will try if she realizes what we are doing." "How long do I have?" Seren asked. "I do not know. His heartbeat has been irregular since this morning. Hours, maybe less." Seren nodded. She took Thalric's hand in both of hers and closed her eyes. She reached for the bond. Not the channel, not the riverbed, the root. The place beneath everything. The first time she had seen him. Not at the formal introduction. Not at the treaty ceremony where their families had arranged their meeting. Before that. 3 days before, in the castle library, when she had gotten lost looking for the archive wing and had stumbled into a reading room where the future king of Valdrin sat alone on the floor between 2 bookshelves, eating an apple and reading a book of Southern folk poetry with such complete, unself-conscious absorption that he did not hear her enter. She had stood in the doorway and watched him turn a page, his brow furrowed in concentration, apple juice on his chin, a man entirely stripped of his title and his armor and his reputation, and her wolf had lifted its head for the first time in her life and said, "There, that one. He is ours." Seren held that memory like a coal in her cupped hands and pushed. The world tore open beneath her, and she fell. She landed in the garden. Not a garden she recognized. Not at first. The light was wrong, thin and colorless, filtering through a sky that looked like stained linen. The hedges were skeletal, stripped of their leaves, and the flower beds held nothing but black soil and frost. A fountain stood in the center, dry, its stone cracked, water stains marking where the flow used to reach. Then she realized where she was, and her breath caught. Their wedding garden. The courtyard behind the chapel where they had spoken their vows under a canopy of white wisteria, with the scent of jasmine so thick you could taste it. She remembered the sunlight that day, warm and golden and impossibly perfect. Remembered Thalric's hands trembling when he took hers. Remembered laughing because the most powerful alpha in the kingdom could face down a border war without blinking, but could not get through his own wedding vows without his voice cracking. This was that place, hollowed out, stripped of color and warmth and life. Everything that had made it beautiful had been consumed, leaving only the architecture of the memory standing like a skeleton picked clean. Thalric sat on the ground beside the dry fountain, his back against the cracked stone. His head was bowed, his arms resting on his knees, and he looked smaller than she had ever seen him. Not physically diminished, though he was that too, but compressed, folded inward, like a man trying to take up as little space as possible. "Thalric," Seren said, moving toward him. He looked up. His eyes were lucid, clear for the first time in weeks, and the recognition in them broke her heart because it was tangled with so much shame. "You should not be here," he said. His voice was rough, scraped raw, like he had been using it for a long time with no one to hear. "Neither should you." She knelt in front of him, close enough to touch. "Do you know where we are?" He looked around at the dead garden, the frozen ground, the colorless sky. "I know where we were," he said. "I do not know what this is now." "It is the bond," Seren said. "What is left of it?" His jaw tightened. He looked away from her, and she watched his throat work as he swallowed. "I remember," he said very quietly. "Not everything, but enough. The hall, the announcement, your face when I said her name." He closed his eyes. I could see it happening. I was inside my own body watching myself destroy the only thing that mattered, and I could not stop it. I could not even close my eyes. Seren reached for his hand. He pulled it away. Do not, he said, his voice cracking. You should not have come back. Not for me. Not after what I did to you. You did not do anything. You were taken from me. I was not strong enough to stop it, he said, and the words came out with a raw, bleeding honesty that made her chest ache. She walked into the court 6 months ago, and I felt something wrong from the first moment. Something pulling at the edges of my mind. And I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was strong enough, that the bond was strong enough, that nothing could touch what we had. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, and night after night she peeled me apart, layer by layer, and the worst part, the very worst part, was that the last thing she took was you. Your face was the last thing I lost. I held on to it as long as I could, and it was not long enough. Serene's tears fell onto the frozen ground between them. She told me you left because you wanted to, Thalric continued, his voice barely audible, that you had been looking for a reason to go, that I had never been enough for you. Not really. And the moment I faltered, you proved it. He looked at her, and the devastation in his expression was so complete it stole her breath. And I believed her, because somewhere in me, I had always been afraid that was true. There it was, the wound beneath the wound. Not the enchantment, not the manipulation, not the 6 months of psychological warfare. The fear that had been there long before Vera arrived, the quiet, buried conviction that he did not deserve what they had. That a man who had inherited a kingdom through violence, who carried the weight of every hard decision and every necessary cruelty, was not the kind of man who got to be loved like that. Vera had not created that fear. She had simply found it, cracked it open, and climbed inside. Seren understood because she carried the same wound. You want to know why I removed the crown? She asked, her voice thick with tears. I told myself it was dignity, that I was refusing to stand beside a man who had chosen someone else. But that is not the whole truth. Thalric looked at her. I removed it because some part of me had always been waiting for that moment, she said. The moment you realized I was not enough. I grew up watching my mother serve a mate who looked through her, watching her shrink year after year, and I swore I would never be that woman. So when you stood in front of the entire court and said another woman's name, I did not fight. I did not question it. I did not even consider that something might be wrong. I just accepted it, because deep down, I had always believed it was coming. Thalric stared at her, his lips parted, his eyes bright with tears. We both believed we did not deserve this, Seren said, gesturing between them, at the dead garden, at the cracked fountain, at the ruin of everything they had built. And she used that belief to tear us apart. She did not have to be stronger than our bond. She just had to be louder than our fear. The ground beneath them trembled. But she was wrong, Seren continued, her voice rising. And so were we. You are enough. You have always been enough. And I am not leaving. Not because I owe you, not because the bond demands it, but because I choose you. Right now, in this ruined place, with everything stripped away. I choose you. She reached for his hand again. This time, he did not pull away. His fingers closed around hers, tight and desperate and shaking, and the contact sent a jolt through the dead garden like lightning striking parched earth. The ground cracked. Warmth bled upward through the frozen soil, and Seren watched in awe as green shoots pushed through the black earth around them, unfurling in seconds, spreading outward in a widening circle. The fountain behind Thalric shuddered, and water erupted from the cracked stone, clear and bright, and catching light that was no longer gray, but gold. The wisteria climbed the dead trellises and burst into white bloom. Jasmine flooded the air so thick and sweet it made her dizzy. Color rushed back into the world like blood returning to a numb limb. Thalric pulled her forward, his free hand cupping the back of her head, and pressed his forehead against hers. His breath was warm on her lips, and she could feel his heartbeat through their joined hands, strong and steady and accelerating. "I choose you," he said, and the words vibrated through the bond channel like a struck bell. The bond ignited. Not a flicker, not an ember. A wildfire, roaring through the reopened channel, burning out every trace of corruption, every thread of foreign influence, every poisoned whisper that had taken root in the dark. Seren gasped as she felt it blaze through her, rewriting the emptiness, filling the hollow behind her ribs with heat and light, and the overwhelming, absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. On her throat, the bond mark seared itself back into existence, deeper than before, burning with a warmth that felt like a permanent sunrise. On his throat, the same. The garden blazed with color and light and the sound of rushing water. And somewhere far above them, in a room full of glass dishes and the stench of standing water, Vera screamed. They woke together, gasping, their hands still locked between them. The king's chambers were transformed. The glass dishes had shattered, every single one, the dark liquid evaporating into smoke that dissolved against the morning light streaming through curtains someone had thrown open. The air smelled of cedar and iron and juniper and clean, honest fire. Thalric looked at her. His eyes were his own again, clear and gray and filled with such staggering relief that she started laughing and crying at the same time. "There you are," she whispered. He pulled her against his chest and held her so tightly she could feel every beat of his heart against her ribs. "I am sorry," he said, his voice wrecked, muffled against her hair. "I am so sorry." "I know," she said. "Me too." They stayed like that for a long time, tangled together on the bed, the bond humming between them like a living thing relearned. From somewhere in the castle she heard Jorith shouting orders, guards moving, a door being broken down. Vera would be dealt with. The kingdom would recover. The court would whisper and judge and eventually adapt, as courts always did. But that could all wait. Right now there was only this. His arms around her, her hand against his chest, the bond restored and blazing, pouring warmth through every crack the parasite had left behind. For the first time in weeks, Seren closed her eyes without fear, and the darkness behind them was warm. The crown sat on the arm of the throne for 43 days before Seren put it back on. Not because the court demanded it, not because protocol required it, but because on a cold morning in late winter, Thalric brought it to her in their chambers, set it on the table beside her tea, and said, "This belongs to you, whenever you are ready. No rush." Then he kissed her temple and left for his morning briefing without another word. She stared at the circlet for most of the morning. The moonstones caught the winter light and threw small rainbows across the table, and she thought about what it meant to put it back on. Not obligation, not duty, choice. She wore it to dinner that evening. Thalric noticed immediately, though he tried to hide it. She caught the way his gaze lifted to the crown and stayed there, the way his breath hitched slightly, the way his hand found hers beneath the table and held on like he was anchoring himself to something real. The healing was not fast. Trust, even between bonded mates, did not rebuild overnight. There were difficult nights when Thalric woke gasping, reaching for her in the dark, terrified that the emptiness had returned. There were mornings when Seren caught herself touching her bond mark just to confirm it was still there, still warm, still hers. But the nightmares grew less frequent. The checking became habit rather than desperation, and slowly, carefully, they rebuilt what had been taken from them, not by restoring the old bond, but by building something new on top of the scar. Something that knew how fragile it was, and chose to exist anyway. On the first day of spring, Seren woke to pale gold light, and the scent of juniper drifting from the open window. Thalric was still asleep beside her, one arm draped across her waist, his face peaceful and unguarded in a way that still made her chest tight with gratitude. She pressed closer, felt his arm tighten around her in his sleep, and closed her eyes. The bond hummed quietly between them, steady as a heartbeat, warm as the spring light creeping across the sheets. They slept,